This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Kolchak the Night Stalker, episodes 9 and 10.
The visions, the nightmares of a child are perhaps the most frightening and horrifying of any human animal can conjure. Some people who were in Chicago during the first stifling hot weeks of July would say that was so. If they were still alive.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast headed into the sewers because some kid at school told us he saw the Ninja Turtles down there. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
You know, I had something that's real, but it reminds me, I remember being in school, I guess I was of that age when the Ninja Turtles got very popular, and teachers were very concerned that us kids were going to go into the sewers to look for Ninja Turtles. I don't know if any kid ever did it. If it was like one of those things like, you know, Halloween, people putting razors in the chocolate sort of thing. Like everyone was worried about something that never really happened, because I don't know any kid who went to the sewers, but teachers were very concerned.
I do remember that as well. As I was watching this, that's what came into my mind. I'm like, oh, remember when everyone didn't want us to go in the sewers to find the Ninja Turtles?
Can you even get into a sewer?
I didn't live in New York. Why would the Ninja Turtles be there? All right. Well, this week we're back for more Kolchak, but we're also joined by a guest who's going to provide us a little bit of the journalist's perspective on old Kolchak here. We've got an award-winning newspaper writer and editor, along with one of the crew of the Skiffy Fanty Show. It's Trish. Trish, thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here.
Well, welcome to the show. It's going to be nice to get some new perspectives on Carl. We've been doing this for now, what are we, on the 6th or 7th episode?
Something
I don't
like
know how
that.
many episodes we've done.
Yeah, 4 or 5, I think.
Oh, it's not that many. It just feels like a lot more. So, you're a fan of Kolchak?
Absolutely. I had heard about it for years and years. I didn't actually get to watch the show until a few years ago when it came in over one of the digital stations that sprung up soon after, you know, TV went digital. And so it would come on late at night on Saturdays after I had finished work. And, you know, the picture would jump in and out, so I, you know, would not always catch all the dialogue or anything, but but it was fun. And so, you know, but I've heard about it for years and years and years, and was happy to finally. And now, of course, now that I can watch it on NBC.com, I can hear all the dialogue and even do closed captions and stuff.
Truly, the best thing that happened was when I found out this was on NBC.com, because before that, I was like scouring like very, very off-brand video sites trying to find the show.
Right.
So this is what Vincenzo. That's a typical editor, right? That's what you'd expect at a newspaper. This is exactly how a newspaper works.
Yeah, and of course, I certainly identify with his problems of, you know, not wanting Carl to publish wild theories without any evidence to back it up, and, you know, worrying about libel and stuff.
So you're the Vincenzo at work then.
I have been. I'm a little different role these days, but I try not to yell at people like Vincenzo so does. But
To be fair, I think his exasperation is warranted, though. I mean, you know, he's just trying to get his little paper out, and every week Kolchak comes in and goes, "Demons!" You're like, all right, just get your story done.
Right.
I will say, I do think that's one of the fun parts about the Vincenzo character, is he's never unjustified. Like, as there's never at any point where you're like, he's being too harsh on Kolchak. You're just like, yeah, this poor man's just trying to run his business and it's not going well.
He really lets Kolchak get away with, well, not murder, but
he murdered a
lets
vampire once, so he did let him get away with it one time.
True. He lets him get away with a lot, though.
I guess that's a good question. Is it murder if Kolchak kills a supernatural entity that he does quite frequently?
Well, the police let him off, so I think it's a no.
I am not a lawyer, but I guess it would depend on what kind of court you get. I mean, you could always plead self-defense or defense of others, but, you know,
That's
doesn't always
true.
work.
That is true. He's always standing his ground. That's the key.
I think, though, statistically, every time you plead vampire, you end up are guilty.
Not a workable defense.
Yeah.
No body, no case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Trish, as we like to ask new guests on the show, what's your history with TV sci-fi? Are you a big fan? Did it go back a long ways, or is it something you don't watch much of?
TV sci-fi, that would have started back in junior high, maybe even elementary school. Star Trek was on continual rerun. They would usually start around 4 p.m. So we'd run home from the bus stop just in time to turn it on, watch the opening credits, and try to guess which episode it was. Be the first one to guess, the Nazi planet, the man trap, whatever it would be.
That is actually a fun game to play.
Right. And then after that, Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who. My sister and I held the first Doctor Who convention in Wilmington, and it was a pretty sad small affair. Just like, I don't know, we got like 30 people to come, so not too bad.
That's pretty good. That's not bad for the first Doctor Who convention.
But we only did it the once because, the PBS station stopped showing Doctor Who, so...
Really drove down the number of fans in the community.
Right. But yeah, so I've been watching and reading science fiction basically since as soon as I could comprehend it. My daddy also, he had many paperback science fiction books in the house, and it was just kind of always part of our environment.
A family tradition, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's very funny. I also am just like, that sounds much like me getting off of school and racing home to watch Next Generation. It's just like, it's in reruns. I got to get home before 4 o'clock to watch it. Is it going to be the one where they all devolve into weird monsters?
You're like, oh no, it's that horrible one where it's just a clip show with Riker in a coma. Remember that one? It was terrible.
That one was quite a strange one. Yeah. All right. Well, Trish, should we get into it? Should we get into these episodes?
Let's do it.
All right. Here is the IMDb summary for Episode 9, The Spanish Moss Murders. A research experiment in dream deprivation produces a corporeal Cajun boogeyman covered in Spanish moss.
Luke, one thing I want to mention about this episode, didn't this episode specifically just feel like an episode of Sleepwalkers?
It did. I also noted that because in this episode, they'll go to a sleep clinic and meet a bearded doctor who runs a experimental sleep treatment. And I kept thinking of, I have it in my notes somewhere, but what was that Ursula K. Vernon one we watched? You
mean Ursula K. Le Guin, I believe.
Le Guin, thank you. I'm thinking of the other author.
The Lathe of Heaven.
Yes. I kept thinking he was just like the psychiatrist in Lathe of Heaven. He's a very amoral doctor of some sort.
Yeah.
It is funny, though. It does have a lot in common with Sleepwalkers. It's the first time they've really dealt with dreams on this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of. I mean, you kind of find out at the end, but they don't really... I don't know how much they deal with dreams as much as they deal with moss.
They deal more with moss.
Wet moss.
I mean, it begins at that sleep clinic with a clumsy lab assistant. Oh, that's all she gets all episode. She's so clumsy. Even after she dies, that's all everyone says about her.
She's also bright and interested in things or something like that.
That's true.
I'm so dumb. I didn't realize that was supposed to be that was going to be her defining character is that she's clumsy. I just thought the actress gave it a little extra something. I'm like, oh, look at that. She had a very little role and she's like, I'm going to make her clumsy. I was like, oh, good for her. Then later on, it's actually a plot point.
Right.
She does a good job with it because she's leaving work late to, I guess, get home for, I believe it's the 4th of July. And on her way home, she bumps into a monster called I'm going to ruin it now, the Paramafay, I believe is how they pronounce it. And his killer move in this episode is he's a big moss monster, a moss man, if you will, who gives you a lethal hug. He hugs you to death.
Indeed.
And what we're going to come to learn about him is he's some sort of old Louisiana boogeyman. That's kind of his thing. We're going to deal with a monster from Louisiana. I didn't look into it, actually. I should have. I don't know if this is a real thing or not.
I confess I did not Google it either. Let's see.
I'd put money on that this is not a real thing. I don't think there's any tradition where this moss man comes in and hugs you to death. That'd be my vote. So
far, and including this particular podcast, the monsters from ancient times have been made up.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm seeing Paramafay in the Buffy Mega Crossover Wiki.
Well,
There's an entry for Père Maffei, the Cajun Boogeyman, on vampires.com. So it is at least an urban legend, not just made up for this show.
I'll tell you, if vampires.com has it, it has to be real.
That's your homepage, right?
Yeah.
Père is French and is father in French, and Mal is bad, and Fay is something like fait accompli, something that is done, a deed. So it's like Daddy does bad or something.
Daddy does bad. That's a better name. They should have called it Daddy does bad all episode. At any rate, after this poor lab assistant is killed, the next day the police find a chef at a very chic French restaurant who has also been hugged to death and is covered in moss. And this is, of course, where Kolchak comes in, because he's one of the first reporters at the scene of the crime.
And we also meet, who I think up to this point, I think we're, 8-9 episodes in, Captain Joe Mad Dog Siska. He's my favorite of the police that we've met so far, because I think the idea that what we're going to learn in the episode is he's someone who is actually very congenial and very open and very easy to work with for Kolchak. And Kolchak seems very perturbed the whole time because they clearly have a history, as he does with all these characters we meet. But it's because this guy, he's being the opposite of what he normally is. And I just thought it was a really fun thing to have this guy just on the brink of exploding at all times because he's gone to therapy.
Right. He's been in group therapy, trying to learn to be an I'm okay, you're okay kind of guy. But you can just see him throttling his anger that wants to erupt at every moment that he's interacting with Kolchak. It's really fun, and that is one of the things that I do love about this show, is that so many of the side characters are fleshed out in that way, not just cardboard people moving around.
Yeah, I felt that this was a nice touch, because after seeing so many captains fight with him, the first thing we see of this guy is he comes in, and when I think a patrol officer tries to turf old Kolchak out, he says, "Hey, stop that. Every man has a right to earn a living." And I was just like, "Oh, who's this guy?" I'm like, what a nice thing to say about Kolchak. But yes, it is only that he's been getting therapy, and Kolchak's really going to push his buttons all episode, see if he can make him blow. At any rate, the police basically have found this dead man. There's some moss on him, and they're wanting to get this wrapped up, as usual in Kolchak, pretty quickly. They have a convenient suspect ready to pin the murders on, some sous chef who used to work there.
It's actually, I would say, in all the episodes we've seen, this is one where I actually don't blame the police so much, because the guy he's a disgruntled employee who would threaten to kill the guy before.
That is true.
If I was a cop, I'd be like, I think this is a pretty open and shut case, everyone.
That is true. But, Kolchak, as always, he has his doubts about who killed that chef. So, once again, he cons his way through the police department, finds his way into, I was a little disappointed. I thought he needs to get the autopsy on the dead chef, and I thought we were going to get Gordy the Ghoul again, who was in those first early episodes as like a corrupt sort of mortician. But he just ends up sneaking into another room, convincing a guy who guards the filing cabinet Paco, that some kids let the air out of his tires, and then he opens up a file and finds out that the police have noted that this is very similar death-wise to a hit and run they saw recently, also containing the same moss that was found on the chef. So, Kolchak gets a couple clues he can sort of follow for the episode.
I mean, it's a fast scene, right? Because if you think about it, it doesn't really make that much sense how he's able to connect these two things just by grabbing random files, but it's just a fast scene to get us where we need to get for Kolchak, right? And I thought it was okay. I'm fine with any time they kind of expand the world, so it's like, oh, he's got a couple avenues at the police department he can get information. I was like, sure, why not?
No, it was nice and streamlined. It kept the episode rolling, because using these clues, he's able to go to the botanical gardens, where he's able to learn that the moss on the guy is he knows the Latin name, but he learns the layman's name, Spanish moss, and he discovers that it could never grow in Chicago's cold climate. So, mystery number one.
Yes, I have a lot of familiarity with Spanish moss, and I can talk about that a little bit if you want.
Oh yeah, tell us about Spanish moss. I don't know anything about it. I live in cold Canada. There's none here.
So it's a very it's like a mass of threads together. It's what do you call so probably you think of moss as just something that grows by a river on a stone or something like that.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I think of moss
Okay,
is.
Spanish moss grows mainly in trees. It hangs down from the branches and stuff. It can be kind of a lacy fall down from a tree. It's gray, or at least I mostly see it's gray. It's certainly gray when it's dried. But actually, you northerners, if you visit, you'd be tempted to touch it, but don't, because it often contains chiggers, which are little biting insects,
Oh,
sort of like ticks.
okay. This is good advice because I truly would just touch it.
It's tempting to touch. It looks nice to touch, and I've actually seen it used in floral arrangements, but beware.
This is a good explanation because what we see Carl do when he goes to the Botanical Gardens, I just saw him like digging around in like a pool of water, and then also there's like stuff growing up. I couldn't get a sense of what Spanish moss was. I'm like, is it in the water or is it on that like thing?
Wouldn't it be more interesting, though, if instead of suffocating people, he just touched them gently and then little ticks or whatever there are in them, that's what caused all the deaths?
That'd be pretty good if he controlled the bugs on him.
Right.
That'd be pretty good. I mean, it would be fun, too, because then the Kolchak would be finding bites on them and have to figure out the bites origin.
Yeah, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, I still like a good suffocation death, but I think the little bugs add a little something.
You always say if you've got to go, you'd rather be hugged to death.
Yeah, that's right. With love.
And of course, the other clue he has is there's a similarity to the death of the lab assistant who has been written up as a hit and run. And he goes to the lab to meet her boss, this Dr. Pollock, who we were discussing earlier, this Sleepwalker's character, if you will. And Pollock, very rude man, initially doesn't even remember who she is. And then when one of his coworkers reminds him, he's like, oh yeah, that schlub.
Yeah, what were they implying? Are they implying here that he's just kind of a jerk, or is it that he is inappropriate with his staff? Like, what were they getting? I just got that he was just a not very nice person. We're just not supposed to like him. Am I right?
I saw him touch the still living female lab assistant on the shoulder, pat her on the back as he went by, and she kind of glared. But he may not be harassing anybody. That's just his way.
Right.
I mean, intentionally. Yeah, I thought, maybe he's just face blind and he didn't remember the name. But, oh, yeah, the one who died because she's clumsy. She was always so clumsy.
Yeah. He is, I think he's supposed to be like somewhere between like the genius who doesn't notice other people and a jerk. Because like you said, that other lab assistant there, I believe at some point he asks her for something and he calls her my pet. And I'm just like, hey, you can't do that at the office.
Yeah, I was very amused when Kolchak was trying to run a scam on Dr. Pollock, and he said, "What do you think I am? Some woolly-headed, absent-minded professor?" The police were just here. I know you're trying to investigate this murder, not write a series about my sleep clinic.
I do like the Kolchak. Like, probably 75% of the time, any scam he tries to run immediately, like, falls apart. Like, he just, like, no one believes him.
Yeah, it is a good little trait they've had, because I think it was not this episode, but one of our previous where, like, he has a whole thing. He's pretending to be someone to get into this jewelry store, and they're just like, we don't buy it. And he's like, oh. Anyways, I'm Kolchak. Like, it's just, there's this funny thing. He's sort of, maybe it's not the right way to say it, not bumbling his way forward, but he has this momentum that, regardless of how things go, he just keeps going.
He works the angles. He's got a million tactics to try, and he just, goes through his list until something works, and he gets more information.
That's a good description of it. That's definitely what he's doing. I mean, and at the sleep clinic, all he really learns is that, like, the doctor's like, no, I think she died in a car accident. She was extremely clumsy. It makes sense to me. So he's a little bit dead-ended here. But as this case is kind of getting cold, he gets a call from, I guess he's got an orderly sort of on his payroll, like a guy he pays for information at a hospital. And that guy gives him a call and says that there was another person brought in dead with a similar crushing wounds, and that it was a Cajun street musician who had died in a basement trying to smoke a joint. And so Kolchak decides he needs to go down and check out the crime scene. And this is one time where his impersonations work. He pretends to be a health inspector for some reason.
Well, it sort of works, because the guy's sort of like, let me see your ID, and he sort of flashes it real quick. He goes, the ID. Anyway, and he just kind of keeps going with it. And the guy's like, I think part of it is the guy just doesn't really care so much. He's like a maintenance person or someone who's just there to clean up this issue. So I don't think he has too much invested in the credentials.
No, not really. But it's where Kolchak's able to piece together there's moss at the crime scene here and some dirty water. So he's just like, I better learn more about this dead musician. And he heads down to, I guess, where the hippie street musicians hang out in Chicago. I guess that's what the idea is here.
It sounded like, Kolchak thought, now that I think about it, there's musicians on every street corner, and suddenly, poof, there they were. Although we've never seen them in any other Kolchak episode.
The viewers at home they know everywhere they go. They can't get away from these hippie street musicians.
But we get to meet another great character, Pepe LaRue or Morris Shapiro, depending on who he's talking to, I suppose.
Yes, this is another man who lives amongst the street performers. He's a bit older than I guess most of the other ones, but he's hung out with this dead musician, and he's able to explain a lot about what's going on. Although I do like that reveal. Like, he starts with a French accent, and then he drops and says, "I'm Maury from Brooklyn. I just do this for the money."
Yeah,
Maury was a great little character actor because I couldn't get a sense of what he did exactly, and his explanation was like, I came here in 1938 to join the mob, but I was too short. And I'm just like, what?
I loved how he just came out with that.
But essentially what Maury's able to tell him is just, apparently the dead musician was from Louisiana, and there's quite a few apparently Louisiana musicians kicking around. We see one very briefly at the top of the scene as he hops in a cab to leave, and then he starts talking about, it's like, oh yeah, there was another musician from Louisiana who disappeared 2 months ago after the dead man and him got in a fight over a girl. So maybe it was him trying to get back over this fight with the girl. This is like this whole reveal about this, and even to the point that Pepe/Maury is just like, and they keep talking about this père Maffei. They love to talk about this boogeyman. They're always threatening each other with him. It's a real childhood, I guess, trauma they have. And as Pepe's kind of walking around with Kolchak, of course, the père Maffei just snatches him from right next to Kolchak, and Kolchak does not immediately notice.
Yeah.
He's a very sneaky little père Maffei.
That was a little different from the other deaths, just that quick snatch, because usually they are menaced and see a reflection or something at first and start to get scared, and then they die. But here it was just whoop.
Whoop. I know. I was also like, this monster is sneakier than most of the ones in Kolchak.
Well, it was one of those things where he was sneaky because the plot needed it to, because it was like, none of the other ones. I think that when we first see him attack the nurse, he sort of bumbles his way down the alley. It's like, in this one, he's Spider-Man. But, whatever. I'll allow it.
You'll allow it.
Yeah.
In the end, Kolchak does end up looking for Pepe and getting a glimpse of this Moss Man. So it still amounts to a similar concept. Is now that Kolchak's definitely sure there's a monster on the loose.
And am I wrong? Is he only attacking in a very specific area, in only a block area?
I think that's the case. My understanding was it seems to be fairly contained where he's attacking.
It's pretty centralized to wherever this energy is transmitting.
It's in Little Louisiana town part of Chicago.
I love that part of Chicago.
Kolchak, of course, then decides he's got to go compare notes with, what's his name, Captain Sisyphus?
It's
Siska.
Siska, yeah.
Like Cisco, but Siska.
Like Cisco, but Siska. The captain, he's already looked into this sort of character he's heard about from Pepe. His name is Paul Linguez. That was the person the dead man had a fight with. But he knows it couldn't be that man because he spent the last 2 months at the sleep clinic in a voluntary coma.
Yeah, which is a pretty good little twist, right? The number one suspect has been sleeping the whole time.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting, and I at that point I'm like, I gotta learn more about this experiment, and of course they get into it with us. But this man volunteered for a study where he's been put into a coma for an indefinite amount of time, apparently, where Dr. Pollock's keeping him in a dreamless sleep just to see what happens.
Yeah, that must have been some kind of waiver he signed at the beginning of the experiment.
That street musician needed that money real bad.
Yeah. I guess he's living rent-free in this clinic.
That's true.
It's because he's having to, his other life is sneaking into basements to smoke a single joint, as these musicians are wont to do.
What a great gig between jobs, Jordan. Just get put into a coma for a few months. Don't have to worry about where you're living.
Yeah, it's true.
Wake me up when my next job comes along. But what we get to see is Kolchak will go back to sleep clinic, talk to the doctor about all the experiments, and it's just one of my favorite things this episode is while he's there, alarms just start going off in the sleep clinic, something to do with what's happening in Paul Linguez's dreamless sleep, and Kolchak's like, what are all these alarms about? And the doctor's like, I have no idea. I just set the equipment and sometimes these alarms go off, but like we'll figure out what it meant when this experiment's
Wasn't
over.
that odd that the doctor was like, you think it would have been like, all hands on deck, everyone start grabbing nodules and buttons and stuff, but his doctor's like, look at that, the alarm's going off. Interesting. I was like, aren't you testing? You're just testing nothing?
Yeah, I mean, usually when you do experiments and something unexpected happens, that's what you focus on. You don't just say, "Oh, we'll figure that out in post."
Yeah, exactly. It seems like the alarms must have been set up for some criteria to go off. It's just very funny. He's like, I have no idea what these criteria were set up for. This is just factory defaults, my friend. I have no idea what's happening. But as that alarm's going off, the Paramouffet is reappearing on a street corner where a bike cop's driving by, and you better believe that bike cop's getting hugged to death. And of course, Kolchak will hear about this new murder on his police scanner, which is honestly one of the best tropes they've put into this, is that he just has a police scanner. It makes it so easy for him to get information. I think it was one of the smartest things the writers put into this right away.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing that reporters would listen to the police scanners. So several of the newsrooms I've worked in have had them going all the time. So you'd have the TV set to a news station, you'd have your police scanner, you'd have possibly a radio going somewhere, and you'd have phones all over the place. So newsrooms are usually, or have been, very noisy places. Now most police scanners are encoded so that you can't just listen to it. So, technically they broadcast the stuff, but ordinary citizens can't usually listen in on the police anymore.
So this is very authentic journalism stuff, and that Kolchak would have a police scanner ready on the ready.
That's absolutely believable. Yes.
Unrelated. I remember being a kid, and remember you used to have those like little walkie-talkie things. Mm-hmm. I remember tuning it to a signal and getting on to a police. I don't know if there was police by. And I thought it was so cool. And then my brother told me it was illegal and I was going to get arrested. And I was so scared. I remember I took the walkies and I hid them under the bed because I thought, no one will find them now. No one will know what I've done, this horrible crime I've done.
No, under the bed is a safe zone.
Mm-hmm.
You were like a real mobster. You were like, I know. He's under the bed.
Yeah. And I don't think it's illegal. I don't think it was illegal. But anyways, your older brothers are never a great source of information.
But now that he kind of has this information that Paramouffet appears to appear, at least tangentially when this alarm goes off, and seems to be very Cajun-based, he decides to track down one of these Louisiana musicians. He bumped into this guy just before he met Pepe, and he goes to visit this other. There's so many Louisiana musicians to keep track of in this episode. This guy, he's at a recording studio at the moment. He's recording a quick bullet.
Yeah.
Jordan, you're always trying to make a bullet.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things in the studio I liked. At one point, the whole thing is that they're trying to get this recording done in Kolchak as per usual to his character. He doesn't really care, and he's just kind of trying to get the information he needs. But at one point, the guy, I think it's the engineer or the producer recording, is just like, oh man, this was going to be a great big hit. And look, nothing to Cajun violin music or whatever he was playing, but I don't know if the audience is that big. I don't know if it was going to be a big hit. But they were sort of acting like they were. I was like, this might be a minor hit, guys. Calm down. You can take 2 minutes to answer some questions.
Big in genre, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perhaps big in that very specific genre.
I did like, though, when he shows up and like, we're recording a bullet, and then someone stops and is like, let me explain what a bullet is. It's a song that goes right to the top. I'm like, thank you. But the big point of this whole scene is that this musician is going to explain what the Paramouffet is, which is a Spanish moss monster that they're constantly threatening with his kids. And he's also able to explain that the only thing that can kill one is a stake of bayou gum tree wood stabbing the Paramouffet. So I'm just like, all right, here we go.
You know what I loved about that, though? They're like, his one weakness is having a stick jammed right through him. And I thought, coincidentally, that's also my weakness. That also kills me.
You'd be surprised what a lot of creatures a stake through the heart would kill.
Yeah.
Maybe Kolchak should just work as his default, any monster he faces. If I jam something through his heart, let's see if that works.
Yeah, he jam it through their heart and then take a flash with his camera. Those seem to be the two things that stop most of the monsters in this show.
That's true. That camera flash is becoming very handy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's back to the sleep clinic now, where Kolchak shows up, and our captain, Siska, he's hanging out there too, because basically he's put together the same information. He's just like, everything points to this man in a coma, and he's there trying to convince the doctor to wake him up.
And I think at this point, Siska has his therapy has stopped working, I think, at this point in the episode.
Yes, I believe Kolchak has completely undone all his good work.
Yeah.
Yes, a year and a half of therapy down the drain, says Cisco.
He's got a great hat, though. I remember that. I remember that he looked real good.
He had a good mustache too. I liked him all over.
Yeah, I did too.
And Kolchak's able to point out he gets all the I guess the EEG readings that have been going through this coma man. He's like, look, every time an alarm goes off, somebody dies. This has to be the solution here. So the doctor finally acquiesces. He injects the coma man with a double dose of methamphetamine, which I was like, that's a lot of methamphetamine. And of course, it doesn't work. It won't wake him up. And Kolchak's just like, you see, we've got to get some gumwood. We got to get ready. The permafay's coming. And then I guess the idea is somewhere in this man's subconscious, because he's apparently bringing this monster out of his mind as he sleeps, because the dreamless sleep is causing this. The monster is able to hear Kolchak. And as he hears Kolchak threaten its life, this man in a coma just dies. All vital signs go out. The man is dead. And what I kind of like, though, is when he died, basically Kolchak and the police are like, well, case over. He's dead. And they all just go back to their lives, which I thought was a nice turn where they're like, I guess you would. You'd be like, I guess this mystery is concluded. But when Kolchak goes back to the office to sort of, I guess, unpack, there's water leaking from the roof. Vincenzo's there, a little drunk. He's celebrating his successful speech at the press club.
Right, which is like a subplot of the episode.
Weird subplot where he has to give a speech to the press club. And Kolchak goes to his desk and is talking to a janitor about this like water leak and like, the building's going to take forever to fix it. And Kolchak opens his desk drawer and it's just full of moss.
Which was weird because, I mean, I know we've seen like bits of moss in the murders, but like, are we supposed to think that it's so sloppy and he's just like falling apart that it just like leaves it everywhere? So this guy was like, I know where Kolchak works. He took the elevator, he got to the building, went through his stuff, lost a finger or two in the drawer, and then was like, well, I'll leave. And he took off. I think that's 100%. Or something the Paramafay came by, went through all of his desk drawers.
Well, everyone was out at the press club dinner.
Yeah.
But it just basically leads to a scene where Kolchak's like, I've got to kill this moss man. He's out to get me. And like, just raves and rants in front of Vincenzo's friends. And Vincenzo's like, he's working too hard.
Reporters, what can you do?
What can you do? What can you do if your reporter has lost his mind? And of course, this is just puts Kolchak on like tilt. He breaks back into that botanical garden, steals a branch off a gum tree, and then heads to. I mean, I guess I was trying to figure out like because he knows it can't survive in the cold climate, so I guess he's able to be like, well, if he keeps popping up around this neighborhood, he must be in the sewers. So Kolchak goes, pulls the manhole cover off, and then actually, what I thought was one of the better go into a sewer scenes I've ever seen is he climbs down the like ladder into the sewer, and you see him like have to stick his leg into like thigh deep sewer water, and it truly looked awful. As I was watching, I'm like, oh no, thank you, please don't do this.
Yeah, Configures and I watched this together, and we were discussing things that might possibly make us go down into a sewer, such as lost child, or maybe a huge treasure that we were sure we would find.
A real Goonies situation.
Right, but going after a murderous creature that you know is going to make it back to the surface again sometime if it wants to kill you. No, don't go in there. No.
If I went down for treasure and as soon as I saw that first rat running around, I'd be like, you know what? You guys keep it. You keep it. I'll go back upstairs.
It is honest. It's a great scene. Like it's him lowering himself down. And at first I'm like, oh, it's going to be knee high. That's fine. But once it gets up like almost to his waist, I was like, oh, too much. And they just got to shots of rats swimming through the water and rats everywhere. I'm just like, oh, this is awful. I don't want to be down.
It was a good set piece. And they've, this episode, some of these episodes have had better sort of, last acts and conclusions. And this is one of the better ones, I think, where, actually we could talk about for the next episode when we talk to it. I would say compare this to the next episode. They're almost night and day with, I think, how well this works and how, at least in my opinion, the other one doesn't work as well. Because I just think this whole sewer sequence, despite the clear budget restraints of you can't show the Moss Man too much, I think it works really well.
Yeah, I think so too. Because he'll wander around the sewers a little. He'll find old dead Pepe down in the sewer, confirming that Pepe was murdered. And then the Moss Man will rise out of the sewer water in a very effective shot. I was just like, that's a great reveal. This Moss Man just like standing out of the sewer. And of course, he's like 7 feet tall. We haven't mentioned this yet, Jordan, but he's played by last week's villain, Jaws from James Bond.
Yeah.
Two in a row. What a week for him. He got a lot of work that week.
He's such a large, impressive figure that it's like, why would you not use him for these roles, right? Because he's 7'2", I think.
Yeah. He, of course, menaces Kolchak. They get in a bit of a chase sequence, as Kolchak tends to do, which it was a little hard to... Kolchak, like, climbs into a smaller sewer, and then some of that smaller sewer pops him out behind the Moss Man. But it's all just to get Kolchak back to his stake he's made to stop this gum tree stake to stop the Moss Man, the Paramouffet. And as the Paramouffet approaches him, the stab was like he poked him with a stick.
I
know. It
like,
wasn't any more force than that. And the Moss Man just falls over, and I'm just like, well... It really did stop him. It was very effective.
Luckily, Spanish moss is not dense. You can shove something through it quite easily.
Right through it. It can 100% hug you to death. That stick's going right through. And that sort of like wraps up. Kolchak's defeated the monster. It wraps up. It's sort of the end. And I'm only going to mention this because every episode ends with a little like coda where Kolchak gives you a little narration to like wrap up everyone's storylines, even if they don't need their storylines wrapped up. And this particular time, I was just like, I don't know why I need to know this information, but he lets me know that the doctor at the sleep clinic ended up going to work at his family shoe business. And I was like, oh, okay.
I know. You know what? It's this weird thing the show we mentioned it before that they when they introduce people, usually at the beginning of the episodes, where it's just some unfortunate person who's going to get murdered that's going to set off the chain of events for the episode, and they give a ton of information. You know, there'll be a mobster, and we'll find out when they joined the mob and what their specialty was and all this. And they sort of do it at the end of the episode, too. It's like, it's that funny thing. You're like, oh, he went off to go make shoes. They specialized in flats. You're like, okay, thanks. Why are you telling us this?
I find it tends to work better at the beginning of the episode just to set the mood, whereas at the end, I'm just like, I didn't care what happened to that doctor afterward.
Right. Well, I think it's actually a relief that he went into shoes because given his lackadaisical investigative methods and the fact that he apparently may have killed his patient / study subject by double dosing him with meth. Yeah, probably not good for him to be in medicine.
He was asked to leave. But that wraps up the first episode of our double feature here. So you guys ready for episode 2?
I had one more point I want to make,
go for it.
Which is that when Kolchak is in the sewer, he actually swims underwater a few times to try and evade and lure the monster.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
His straw hat stays on, and that is highly suspicious. It should have floated away. So
what they don't show you is that he's got a little strap that he wears under his chin.
It's just, he's got that Indiana Jones thing where it's like the hat just has to stay on, you know?
Right. Well, Configures hypothesized that maybe it's not really a straw hat at all. It's some
part of his
kind
head?
of entity, controlling him or at least giving him bad ideas or something.
He has to keep the straw hat on, Jordan. Otherwise, the wig would fall off.
But that's why he refuses to get rid of the straw hat, even
Right.
when presented with the lovely alternative.
You're positing it sort of like a Mad Hatter type thing where it's controlling him, the hat. The hat's really...
Right, or like the evil spider suit that, Venom contended with. Or, it's not just a straw hat.
All right, I'm on board for the episode of Kolchak where it's revealed that the entire time his hat has been an alien entity controlling him. It would fit right in if there's an episode where one day his hat was evil.
Yeah, they could do it. They'd have to give a whole backstory, though. The hat really wanted to be something else first. You're like, oh, okay, all right, Kolchak.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's go into the IMDb summary for episode 10, The Energy Eater.
There is a theory that dying institutions erect their own mausoleums before they die. This particular monument was to be a hospital and a research center, dedicated to extending the life of man, improving the quality of that life. It succeeded instead in introducing a new horror, a new way of death, a mystery.
Carl discovers that Machimondo, a restless spirit's killing the patients of a new hospital, which is being built over its resting place.
You know what's funny, Luke? When I watched this, the first thing I thought was, or during the episode, was this episode reminds me a lot of the old disaster movie, The Towering Inferno, except if you only focused on the scenes where they discussed the construction of the building and got rid of all the exciting parts. That's what this episode reminded me of.
I mean, I think this is where you and I differ. I love when they talk about all the construction parts.
Oh, do they? Oh, every time they were just like, oh, concrete. I was like, guys, this is TV. I don't care about the concrete.
This is very funny because, this episode starts with the Kolchak attending a hospital dedication, and I felt this was the most, like, investigative journalism that Kolchak's ever been, because while he's at this dedication, we see him in the lobby, and in the basement, there's an employee, like, working with this, high voltage breaker, and then suddenly he's electrocuted and all the walls start shaking and like cracking and breaking, and back in the lobby the lights are flickering, and Kolchak's like, this is weird, this hospital just opened, it shouldn't have this many technical difficulties, should it? And of course the men who are giving the dedication are just like, well, we were giving a tour, but we've decided to take the basement off of the tour. So immediately Kolchak's like, well, I'm going right to the basement, that's where I'm headed.
Yes, good instincts.
Yeah, exactly. And in the basement, he just like, he sees the walls are all cracked. There's this janitor like sweeping up debris. And Kolchak, my favorite character, Kolchak goes up to me. He's like, hey, what happened down here? And this, where's the quote? The janitor looks at me. He's like, I don't know. I'm just a broom pusher. I'm just like, great. I love this janitor character. And basically Kolchak immediately is just like, listen, there's no way a new building should have its basement covered in cracks. Like there's a crack running down the floor. He's just like, this is some shoddy construction, and I'm going to break this wide open. And I felt this episode more than any was about him trying to investigate just like city corruption more than anything.
Or just negligence.
Just negligence maybe. But Kolchak is now going to work on this story, and we get a fun scene which you didn't get last episode, where you go back to the office. He's supposed to be writing about this hospital dedication. Vincenzo comes out and he's just like, what is this story you've written? Why, like,
I
know
loved
that
scene so much.
Why don't you describe it for us?
Okay, so Vincenzo says, hey, where'd you come up with this angle on the hospital? You don't usually write about stuff like this. 2 pages on the lack of geriatric facilities. And Kolchak and Emily both look guilty. And it turns out, it's obvious that Kolchak didn't want to write the story and handed it off to Emily, who was delighted to get a chance to grind her own axe by writing about the geriatric issues. Miss Emily is the crossword lady, by the way, for those not who don't have a script. But yeah, she's absolutely delighted to get a chance to write about what she cares about, and Kolchak was happy to not have to write a story, so it worked out great for them, but Vincenzo is not happy.
I love this relationship with Miss Emily and Kolchak. It's one of my favorite parts of the like developed later in this series is just like he's just handing off work to her. She's happy to write a real story, and then she's like, it's great when Vincenzo starts like asking why they're doing it. She's just like, she gets so mad. She's very passionate about this issue, and she won't hear about it. And Kolchak has to just lie it through his teeth the whole time. He's like, I guess I wanted to do it for Mrs. Emily. That's why I wrote it.
And it is funny, we mentioned it before, this show, almost every time they go back to the office, I know there's sort of like little comedic breaks or breaths from what's happening for the rest of the show, but they always work. Like they're almost always highlighted scenes. And it's surprising to me that now after 10 episodes, there hasn't been an episode, and I would love it, I'm hoping in future episodes, where one of these characters goes out with Kolchak. Because it's like they have such great, like, why not him and Emily going out? They have such a great rapport, and the characters are so fun together. That would be a fun episode. But I have a feeling it's not going to be what this show ever does, but I think it's kind of a shame that they don't use these characters more than they do.
Right. They did have the intern, what was her name?
Marmelstein.
Yes. They did have that early on, but sadly he ditched her, and we
immediately.
never saw. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, he puts her in a trunk. So, that was it. That was her team up.
It is something I wonder about, and it's hard to put my mind where this is in the history of television, but there's rarely a very strong B plot in any of these. So I wonder if that's part of the problem, because right after this little sequence, then Vincenzo tries to assign a Kolchak like a mob hit story, and Kolchak does his usual like reverse psychology where he tricks Vincenzo basically into like taking the story himself because it's like prove that he's still got what it takes to be a good reporter.
Yeah, he uses the old whitewash this fence for me and show me how it's done trick. Another.
But as I was watching it, and it was like not the thing I was most disappointed about in this episode. I'm disappointed about many things in this episode, but I was sad because when he was like, all right, I will write it. I'm going to write this story. And at that moment, since we were dealing with like potentially shoddy building construction, I was really hoping there was going to be like a B plot where Vincenzo looking into the mob was going to cross over with whatever's happening at this hospital.
Yes, I would have loved. But I was at least hoping for him to actually get a good story out of it and show that Kolchak was wrong to just say, "Oh, we can't get a story out of some gangland killing."
I know, and it was such a sad bit because they'll never. This is just like a one gag scene or like a couple gag scene, but like they'll never come back to any of it. I was just like, there was an opportunity to have Vincenzo do a story that crossed paths with like a mob building a hospital that then happened to be supernatural. Like, and I was just a little sad. I'm like, it would have been a great time to like bring Vincenzo and Kolchak into a story together.
But I think you're right. I think what it really is it's just more indicative of a time period in TV. Not that it's bad. It's just the style of TV at the time. We've seen, it reminds me of Galactica 1980 or Gemini Man or any of these shows in this time period where it's like, if they have a main character, the main character does the plot, and you only ever go back for a little bit of information that we might need back at the office or whatever. They only really want to focus on one major A plot, and that's just kind of the style of TV, for better or worse.
Yeah, A plot only, no or very minor B plot.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kolchak ends up calling an architectural engineer who owes him a favor, and the two of them sneak into the basement of the hospital, which is... I'm just going to briefly mention this because it comes up a few times, but like Kolchak keeps having to sneak into this hospital, and we get like, as it begins, it's like the first time he like wears a stethoscope and like pretends like fakes being a doctor to get past security, and then another time he'll come and he'll just like grab a bunch of bedpans and a white lab coat and like carry those around to sneak in, and another time he'll like follow a doctor into a room, like, but he keeps having to go back to this hospital, and eventually they just like stop showing how he sneaks into the hospital. I think they're like, all right, you've seen it 3 times. He's just going to like, this time he like puts a funny hat on and they let him in.
Yeah.
This time he dresses as Patch Adams and gets in.
I think you're right, though. I think they've established it several times. They're like, look, he's going to get in. Let's not waste any more time.
Yes.
We want him walking around that same 2 hallways in the basement for the next 45 minutes.
It was a nice. I thought actually they handled it well though. I'm like I see it a few times and now I don't need to see it anymore. And it's like I'm like they're getting better at this character and showing him like doing his like things to get past people where you can just shorthand it and just get us through it quicker. But he does go down back to this basement to look around, and he kind of gets a confirmation from this engineer that this definitely isn't just like normal. This isn't just like the building settling. This is like clearly like stress damage that's happening. This is a structural problem that he's seeing down here. And as they're looking around, there's all these like work lights set up where they've sort of started replastering the walls and trying to cover up the damage. And all the lights start glowing really bright. And then one by one, they start exploding. And the two of them like beeline it out of there. And then it doesn't really amount to anything, but I do like that the structural engineer gets to the elevator first and just like, catch the next one, buddy. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But what it is that Kolchak had a little earlier, when he had done the tour initially, had met this nurse who worked in pathology, a nurse Eisen. And she just sort of had mentioned, she's like, yeah, no, she sort of covered up for the hospital, but she had mentioned that it is usually too hot in the basement, much hotter than it should be even with the AC running. So he tracks her down, and she finally reluctantly comes forward with like, there have been some deaths in the hospital. Like a man in a heart-lung machine had died horribly recently. And it just seems like people who have been using electrically operated equipment seem to die frequently in this hospital. So Kolchak is like, he's getting the sense something's not right down here. And so he uses this opportunity to sneak into a private hospital meeting that's happening with a bunch of pathologists from around the city who have been invited to look at the unusual deaths happening. And what they basically say is like, patients who die here, their blood has basically been turned into a tar-like substance. All the plasma has been removed from the blood. And it's quite clearly like a medical anomaly. And of course, eventually Kolchak is found out for being in the room, that he's not a pathologist here to help when they ask if he'll join the autopsy. And he says, he'll take the feet. Which I imagine what he's saying is he'll carry the feet of the body, right?
Yeah, I think that was the gag, yeah.
So he gets turfed out, of course, and
well, he gets information. I think it's from either the doctors or this nurse that he says, and correct me if I'm wrong. He's like, it was like a line that went by really fast. They're like it was indigenously built. Was that how they kind of just got there? Like someone just dropped a line?
You're right. This is where we are in this, is that at the very beginning of the episode, when he's talking about the dedication, there were a few deaths that was being built, but where they weren't letting that ruin the celebrations. And there's 2 deaths where there's an indigenous team of workers who I guess do high steel and skyscraper
right, that's
buildings.
What it was, yeah.
2 of them had died during the construction, but no one was talking about that basically. But since he's sort of finding out there's a lot of odd deaths, he's like, I better go talk to this group of people and just see, because they quit the job. They're like, we're not working on this anymore after those 2 deaths. So he tracks down this high steel team, and this is going back to Bad Medicine. They kind of are retreading territory where it's like, what if it was a crazy indigenous legend, but we only cast white people? And they're like, whoa, this is great. Let's do that again. And we loved it so much the last time.
I'll give them this. I don't particularly like the character of who we're going to mean, Jim Elkhorn, I believe his name is, but he's at least interesting because I think he's sort of, he's like, I guess, a foreman, I guess you would call him, a structural engineer, or something like that. I think he's a foreman. But he's also like a womanizer. Is that what, like, it's just this odd character trait that he's always dealing with women?
Yeah, he's a real, when we meet him, he's like, I guess, in charge of this group of indigenous workers, because he's like, quote unquote, their medicine man, which he will say later is just like a hereditary title. But he is like a real blue collar woman, like he's a ladies' man. He's a blue collar ladies' man who just like, he's got a master's degree, but like he could never get as much money as he does like running these like high steel jobs. So he's kind of just settled into this job, and he's kind of like living his best life. And it's where I'm so torn. This episode is like, I'm like, this character, the one indigenous character they wrote, is so much better written than than Bad Medicine, where that was all just like stereotypes, right, and like everyone's been like spray tanned and are just wearing wigs, whereas this guy's just like feels like a real character who just does a job. And like I actually really liked him. I thought he was like actually very charismatic and stuff. It is just unfortunate that like, obviously there's no indigenous writers on this, but also they're just like, oh, well, we'll just find a nice burly white guy to play him, and it's just like, this is so hard to watch in 2022. But yes, this Jim Elkhorn, he explains that basically, yes, we worked that job, yes, we quit, and Kolchak really is pestering him for information. He finally is just like, he doesn't really want to talk to the press, but he's just like, listen, I'll tell you what happened. They were killed by Machimondo. And then he kind of slams the door to his office, and Kolchak's got a new lead to follow. It's just like, what's a Machimondo?
Is it Macho Manito?
Macho Manito, thank you. Yeah. I have it written down, and I can't remember how they pronounce it. Macho Manito, thank you.
Which, again, I will assume, and I know I probably should have done my research, I'm going to assume this is not real. Has any semblance of reality in indigenous cultures. I
did Google this one, and it only brought me back to the Kolchak wiki. So okay. I think this one is completely right. Fictional.
It doesn't show up in vampires.com.
Not this one. And of course, around this time, another patient is killed at the hospital. I don't know how you felt about this scene, but it was pretty grim and kind of sad.
The person in the bed?
Yeah, a young woman who's apparently recently been paralyzed is in a bed, and she cannot move other than a little bit of her right hand.
Yeah, one arm she can move. I was like, what I thought was, this poor woman, she's already been given, the roughest hand of that she could get in life, and it's like, what can we do to this paralyzed lady? Well, why don't we electrocute her to death?
I was surprised that they actually went as far as they did in showing that, the pathetic struggle to reach her call button, the fear on her face, and she finally dies screaming for help. That was, one of the worst deaths I've seen on Kolchak.
Yeah. I was watching it too, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is, it's effective. Like, they do an effective job of it, and I'm not faulting them for it, but I was just like, woof.
Well, what's funny about it is Trish, you're right. You would think they'd use that death for like a monster that has done horrible things, that you're like, oh, I hope he gets his comeuppance. Not this poor lady that's already suffering, and they're like, it'd be fun. What if we make her suffer a little bit more? It's like, what did she do? We just showed up.
Mm-hmm.
But this basically sets off that, like, Kolchak will hear from the nurse Eisen in the pathology lab that someone else has died, and they're just like, all right, we've got to figure this out, and they decide they really need to go recruit this Jim Elkhorn, because he seems to be the only one who has any information about this monster. And they head to his apartment, and they interrupt. This whole scene is actually, I was like, it's kind of fun. They interrupt. His neighbors come over to have him fix a small appliance, I believe, for toaster.
Yeah.
And this female neighbor is clearly there for like alternate, like she's really there for a
that
meet
was
cute.
An excuse, yes.
Here's what I didn't get. It seemed like, was she just irritated at her time being wasted? Because by the end of the scene, she seems to not like Jim at all, but she came over to go see him.
Well, I mean, here she is, this pretty blonde girl comes over with a perfectly reasonable excuse. She's obviously hoping to get some tonight, and these people come in, and Jim stops paying attention to her and just starts talking about this, legend, myths, construction business stuff, and she gets bored. So
yeah. That's what I liked about it too, is that I'm just like, oh, this isn't Jim trying to pull a stunt on this lady. This lady came over and she's like, I'm really into my neighbor.
Well, Jim didn't have any objections, apparently.
Oh, yeah, Jim's fine to give it. But the nurse comes over and she's like, oh, well, this nurse is far more my type. I'm going to chat with her. And the neighbor's just like, you guys, you ruined this for me. You guys all ruined this for me.
Are you saying when my neighbor came over with a toaster oven, she didn't want me to fix the toaster oven?
Well, did you throw her out?
Maybe.
Yes, I did. I was too busy worrying about myths and legends.
Classic problem, George.
Yeah.
You were too busy watching Kolchak. Like, get out of here. I got Kolchak to watch. But basically, this scene is mostly about them learning more about the how do you pronounce it again?
Macho Manito. It's some sort of bear god.
Yes, an invisible bear god that I guess has lived around the area of Chicago.
You know what that is, Luke? It's a budgetary conscious invisible bear god.
Absolutely. It's like when that alien came.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently the people who used to live there pacified it with buffalo, but it hasn't been active for a long, long time. But they theorize it's because at some point over many, many years, the Lake Michigan has shifted and basically put the natural habitat of the Machamondo, whatever you pronounce it, underwater. Hence, it hasn't been active. But the hospital was built. They reclaimed the land that the lake was on, built a hospital on it, and so this must have reawoken this monster. Basically.
Don't you think there was a bit of a turn they missed here, though? The idea that people have taken some land and have just built a large structure on it, and the repercussions of said actions. I know we've seen that before in things, Poltergeist or whatever sort of stories there have been, but I think they missed a turn. They kind of hint at a little bit in this, but it's like there's something I think more that they could have done with this in terms of having them take land that wasn't theirs and the repercussions of such.
You mean like the Indian burial ground trope? I kind of liked that they did not do that.
Oh,
here.
did you? Oh, see, I kind of wanted more of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the less indigenous stuff they do, the better. But I do see the idea of just like, how do you do something about like mankind scarring the land? Like, they definitely wanted to toy with it, but didn't want it. They were just like, we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of monster to plot to get through. So it really is very subtly hinted at, if at all. But the three of them head back to the hospital. Oh, pardon me. The three of them decide somehow that this monster is an energy eater, which is why it's eating plasma, because as we all know, plasma is the human body's energy.
Yeah, they go, plasma is protein and protein is energy, and like energy, and they go on. I'm like, oh, I guess that's answered all my questions as to this invisible bear. That makes all sense.
Also, I believe they describe how it eats as it just breathes in energy, and when it breathes out, it also breathes the energy out. That's why it's causing so much damage, because it's just like energy in, energy out.
Didn't it feel a little bit like they hadn't quite figured everything out by the time they went to camera?
I think this was a loose monster that they had an idea for, but they were like, don't worry about the details. It's more that we're going to see the cool wall cracking downstairs. That's what's important. But they head back to the hospital so that Jim Elkhorn can look around and maybe help. And it's at this point, they get back to the lobby, and Jim tries to set a date with the nurse, and she kind of like walks away. I guess she's going to go back to work. And so we lose track of her, and Kolchak and Jim go downstairs. Kolchak, I mean, I guess authentically, but also annoyingly, badgers Jim into doing a traditional dance downstairs, which I was just like,
yeah,
no, Kolchak, don't.
But I like that. I like that Jim is just like, Okay, I guess I can give the slightest effort.
It is Jim, and this is kind of why it's a shame. I mean, it's 2022. I'm saying this, but like the character's not so badly written as an indigenous. Like he's just like, I can't believe you're gonna make me do this, white man. Like I think he actually says that at some point. He's just like, ugh. Yeah. He's so exasperated. But all that it does is it pisses off Machamondo. The basement starts shaking. Everything starts cracking. There's an explosion in the pathology lab. The X-ray machine has exploded, and Kolchak and Jim go in there, and Kolchak can be a real ghoul because they're like standing over a man's dead body and there's just like X-ray plates everywhere. And Kolchak's just like, grab as many of these X-ray plates as you can carry.
Yeah.
They steal all these X-ray plates. And what I mean, an interesting choice for sure. The camera, Kolchak and Jim never see this, but the camera floats down to the ground and reveals behind part of the explosion that they didn't see. Nurse Eisen has been killed and she's out of the episode.
Yeah, wasn't that odd? I think it was like hey, remember this character we've seen for a bunch of scenes? We just have to add this in so you know why we're not seeing her again. But I was like, again, this is like the second time, like, why are we killing these poor women? That had nothing to do with anything.
I did not even realize that was Nurse Eisen on the floor. I thought it was just a random nurse.
Yeah, it was. I think it's to raise the stakes, but they never, since Kolchak and Jim never find out or mourn her in the future, it is just like such a strange exit for her.
That's sad.
I think they just took some shellac like they're doing to the walls and they just put it over top of her and they're like, no one will notice.
Just bury her in the walls. We'll be fine. And of course, they take these X-rays and they head back and they start like, I don't know quite how they figure this out. We don't see it, but basically they're looking at the X-rays and Kolchak realizes if you line them all up, they're probably going to make, I guess, what is a picture of this invisible monster.
Yeah, I didn't understand. It's a cool visual.
It looks
thing to do.
very cool.
Yeah, like and the actual like them taping it together. I thought it was good, but I was like, but this doesn't make any sense. Like in terms of like how it actually took the picture. I mean, I guess it's just it looks cool to tape all the X-rays together.
And they kind of want, it's this thing, it's like, I guess the thing they couldn't do with the alien is that you never got a chance to see what the monster looked like. And this time they were trying to remedy that by being like, if you take a photo with things outside of our light spectrum, you might get a photo. And like, it is kind of crazy. It's borderline Lovecraftian what they show you. It's like kind of what looks like an eye in the midst of swirling mist. And you're like, this is what this monster looks like. And it does look terrible. Mm-hmm. Like, it does look like the thing that would drive you mad if you saw it.
It's like an eye in the middle of a storm, except a literal eye. Yeah, it's a creepy image.
I agree. I was also like, this is a creepy monster, it turns out. They go back, these two, the Jim and Kolchak team continues for a little bit longer, where they go back and do a little bit more research into the say it again, Jordan.
Machamonito.
Machamonito. It's a great name. And they basically are looking into like the history of it. And one of my favorite parts is it seems like Jim does most of the work. But Jim's just like, listen, I've been finding reports of like dating back to Neanderthals, of it being drawn on caves in the area. At which point I was just like, are there Neanderthal cavemen in Chicago? Does that make sense?
Yeah, in the exact area.
Neanderthals come from the Neanderthal area of France.
Yeah. It all was maybe a little questionable. They're just trying to race through this idea that like this monster like probably predates humanity kind of thing. They're really trying to like set it up as like a very ancient evil. And they also notice in the process that all the reports dating back for like hundreds of years, there only seem to be attacks during the summer. The monster's very dormant during the winter.
This is
where the bear thing. Yeah, this is where the bear thing comes from. It hibernates. And essentially, they're just like, oh, that makes sense. If it was underwater before in the cold Lake Michigan water, that's why now that it's living in the hospital basement, it's a little warmer. It's back, which I thought was bold of them. They gather the hospital brass and the men who built the hospital, and they explain everything to them. They're like, here's what's going on, everybody. And, you know, they're reluctant to accept it, these hospital brass. But while they're there getting the explanation, they get a call that something's happening in the basement. They go downstairs. And they just see the monster at work. It's in a room. It's just busting that door down. And they're like, well, definitely a monster down here.
Yeah, I like that. It's one of those things where whether they entirely believe it, they know there's a problem. So they're like, well, we got to solve it regardless of whether it's a smoke bear demon or anything. So let's just take care of it. Liquid nitrogen, anyone?
Yeah, well, it is amazing because like they see it and they immediately evacuate the hospital. B, they put out a press release explaining that the hospital has weak foundations, so they have to like do something about it. Like they immediately are like A, solving the problem, and B, covering up the problem. They don't waste any time.
Yeah, they did not actually lie in the press release that they gave out. I listened to the wording, and they just said, the foundation, we're having trouble with the foundations, which is true. They just did not explain the actual problem. And I loved that they, spitefully and pettily said, okay, release this to the major news services, implying, but not to the INS. And so Kolchak, of course, is so hugely indignant about that. And for some reason, he goes and yells at Jim Elkhorn about it instead of to Vincenzo. But I guess they had to advance the plot. But Vincenzo would have yelled at him because, why did you go to this press conference and convince these people instead of writing a story about it and putting it in the newspaper?
It is a nice scene because I think you're right. It's very Kolchak in character. It's not so much that they're like covering it up. He's indignant that they wouldn't send it to his paper because it's too small.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're right, because he does yell at Jim Elkhorn about it. And what's kind of fun is Jim Elkhorn's like, all right, well, I'm off this case then. If you're going to yell at me, I'm out of this episode. Goodbye. And that's the last we see of him. He's like, I'm not going to get yelled at by you.
Right. Yeah, he actually uses the line, what do you mean we, white man? Which, given his delivery, I really felt that was a wink and a nod, not lazy writing. Fair
enough. There does seem to be... I feel like the writer cared more about what he was writing about than the previous one. Mm-hmm. I will give this episode that, even though they're still very cringy in this year of 2022. But
here is a point, though. At this point in the episode, it's almost essentially done because we find out the building's essentially going to take care of things and cool it down and stuff. And you almost think like, okay, that's how we've defeated this villain. But they add this sort of like button of like, Kolchak's like, well, I still want to get a picture of it. And I remember I was thinking, like, is this necessary? Does Kolchak, would he really need this photo?
He's had plenty of chances to take photos of the cracks in the basement.
Yeah, like I just kind of thought it was an odd end, because I guess they couldn't have the usual thing where he can't take a piece of stick and stab it through the entity, so he has to do something. But it seemed a weird motivation for me anyways, that he just wanted a photo.
Well, it seems like the last few episodes have all started with him looking banged up in some way, talking into a tape recorder, and he hadn't really gotten banged up yet, so I guess they had to.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is the case. I think they've reached a natural climax, and I think they try to use this press release not being released to him and the insult of it as his motivation for it. But yeah, it's such an odd thing, as he basically takes two cameras, puts infrared in one and ultraviolet film in the other.
$40 worth.
Yeah.
$40 worth.
Film.
I do love they throw around prices a lot. Like he bribes people with $10, and I'm constantly trying to like run the math in my head. I'm like, what is that
worth today? Right. $40 of film has to be worth at least $200 now, right?
Yeah, right. For Vincenzo to be that mad, absolutely. But the idea is he's going to sneak back in and at least get a photo of this monster before it disappears forever, I guess is the thought. Because he gets back to the hospital. Yeah. The hospital is basically piping liquid nitrogen into the basement to refreeze the monster. They really listen to everything Kolchak had to say. They truly are taking all of his advice. I was very impressed.
Yeah, if you're going at it from a structural engineer point, pumping liquid nitrogen into a basement with cracks all over it is definitely not the way to heal this basement.
But what if you have an ancient bear god?
Well, then it's the only way.
Yeah.
So Kolchak sneaks into the basement and he finds a crack with electricity sparking out of it, where I guess you were supposed to understand that that's, if there's electricity, there's the monster standing right there.
It's present, yeah.
So he starts taking photos. Liquid nitrogen starts pouring in. Say his name again. I can never do it.
Macho Manito.
He's getting all riled up from this liquid nitrogen, and Kolchak gets his photos and he starts making his way out of the basement. And then because of the so cold and liquid nitrogen, I guess probably oxygen loss, he collapses in the liquid nitrogen.
I think what it is, the liquid nitrogen fog has spread all over the basement, so he can't really see the cracks in the basement anymore. So I guess his foot caught in one of the cracks and can't get
Oh,
out.
you're probably right. I also was kind of confused. I'm
That's
like,
actually
is he-
Configure's theory.
Did he just see like a really handsome man and fainted? That's what it was like. Wasn't sure.
And then we hard cut, and it's Kolchak waking up in a different hospital. Who found him before he died down there? That's my biggest question.
Someone must have gotten to him really quick, because otherwise he should have asphyxiated. The liquid nitrogen, breathing that in, should have suffocated him.
Well, luckily for you, he only has frostbite.
Some very minor frostbite. What we missed was the scene where it was revealed that Macho Manito was actually a benevolent bear god and like picked him up and carried him to safety.
Wow, that's a stretch.
But yes, Vincenzo's there saying, "Hey, you were saved just barely from the basement of this hospital." He's like, "FYI, most of your film was ruined by the cold." But we developed a couple photos, and on, of course, one of the photos is that same swirling mist and eye. He got his photo. To what end? Who's to say? He got it, so his pride is intact at least. It's going into the Kolchak archive somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of ends with a brief, like the classic coda at the end where he explains kind of what happened. And his explanation is that basically the hospital was very quickly torn down. They built a marina in its place with very deep channels into the cold Lake Michigan. I guess hence once more burying Macho Manito and keeping the world safe.
Keeping him on ice.
Also, the builder of the hospital got to build the what is it, the marina? So double dipped. Good for him. But yeah, that wraps up those episodes. I mean, Trish, is there anything we didn't cover that you want to talk about still?
Well, I do have to say I strongly disapprove of Kolchak's methods of stealing evidence from scenes and blueprints and everything like that. That is not proper reporting technique. You have to put in a FOIA, and I know that makes the story take a long, long time to write, waiting for the wheels to grind through the court system. But it's just wrong to steal evidence.
You would not approve of Kolchak's reporting methods.
No,
You're saying
not.
the ends don't justify the means?
Yeah, I mean, legally, as an editor, I can't approve of this.
Let me guarantee you the ends don't justify the means, because Kolchak never publishes a story.
I know. I think he's published once in 10 episodes.
Oh, that's very funny. Yeah, but that's the episodes. You guys want to rate these then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
Let's episode 9. What was it called? Moss Man Returns?
The Spanish Moss Murders.
That's it.
So, Trish, you know this. We rate out of 10 stars, the IMDb rating scale.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to you how hard or soft you want to be, how critical or you want to be. But what do you think of the first episode?
Well, first of all, I think you have to rate this story on its own merits. I'm not going to compare it to The Expanse or anything in modern TV that has arcs and character development and stuff like that.
I think that's fair.
It's a fairly lighthearted, for horror, episodic TV show. So I was pretty pleased with both of these episodes, although, annoyed with a few elements in each. And really, the Spanish Moss Murders had a lot of interesting points. The monster didn't make me roll my eyes too much. The sleep therapy stuff made me roll my eyes more than the monster did. I don't know that I would want to rewatch it anytime soon at all, but I enjoyed it. So, do we do halves? I'd do 7.5.
7.5. We do halves. We'll do anything. We don't care. Yeah, I feel very similar. Like, it leaned more toward those sort of one-off monster ones we've seen that they don't do so well, like Bad Medicine or The Zombie, or those kind of ones that are just more about the monster, and they can be a little perfunctory, but they still did a better job than a lot of those episodes. So I enjoyed the ride a little more, even if it wasn't a very deep. Like, it was definitely better than Bad Medicine. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say it's a 6.5.
I'm gonna be closer to Trish and mine. I'm gonna also say 7.5. I know it was kind of monster of the week, monster thing, but again, I think I'm in the minority. I like those episodes, and I think this was a different, interesting monster. I like it better than some of the previous episodes we watched. Big spoiler, I didn't like the next episode as much, but this one I do like. I think it's as good as this type of show with its restraints and its conditions can get. So I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Nice. All right, Trish, what about the Energy Eater?
Okay, this one is a bit more problematic.
Just a tad bit.
I really like that Emily got to write a story, even though she didn't get her own byline on it. I enjoyed Elkhorn being an actual person with personality traits. He's a womanizer. He'll help out, but only so far, and he won't be yelled at. No, sir. But so yeah, I'll give it a 6.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I'm on board with you too. Like, I think it's a fun-ish episode. Like, I kind of like the monster. I know, Jordan, you don't like these invisible monsters. I'm finding that I really like it.
It's not that I don't like the invisible monster. I don't particularly like the way this one was done. I think the other ones were better. I think of the 3 invisible entities, this is my least favorite.
Fair enough. This one tickled me similarly to the alien, though not as well. Like, I do agree it's not maybe as cohesive, but it at least was a more interesting monster than some of the other ones, so I was kind of into it. Again, some super problematic stuff in this episode for sure. It's just like so it makes it a real mixed bag.
Yeah.
Great scenes at the office though with Vincenzo and Miss Emily. So I am a little torn on this one. I think I'm gonna go 5.5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit lower. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I just didn't really like this episode. It felt, you know what? I liked everything other than the actual plot of them in the basement looking at cracks. So it's like every time they went back to the office or they went back to anywhere, I was like, this is fun. And then they went back to that stupid hallway with the cracks and the sparks. And I just was like, I don't want to hear more about the Foundation. 5 out of 10.
I don't understand why. It's so enthralling.
Rebar.
All right, well, listeners, we are at a point now. We're halfway through Kolchak. Mm-hmm. We're halfway through the series. We're actually going to take a little mid-season break here and just watch some other TV series, give ourselves a breather from Kolchak. Not that we're not having a good time. This is one of those ones where we're actually kind of having a good time, but it's nice to take a little break, watch some other stuff. So just so you know, when we come back, there will be a little break from Kolchak. You won't hear about Kolchak for like a month or two, maybe a little more. We'll see. We'll see how long it goes. But we will come back. We will finish it off.
We'll see if we feel differently. Sometimes, you take some time away for a show and you look back and you go, I actually really like that show. Or there's been a few where you look back and go, man, I can't believe I watched that piece of crap.
That's true. But since we're taking a little break, do you guys want to find out what the series average right now is for Kolchak?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Just to see. Let me punch it into the old Continuum Drag computer here. All right. Are you both ready for this?
Ready.
Mm-hmm.
The series average currently at the halfway mark for Kolchak the Night Stalker is 6.22.
You know what? That's not bad.
Fairly respectable.
Yeah, it's respectable.
Yeah.
That's a good way of saying it.
I think I like it more than 6.22, but I think like on an episode-to-episode level, I think that is like there's some high highs and then there's some but occasionally they bottom out a little. So I do see why it's coming in there. But like I said, I'm enjoying it, so I will be looking forward to coming back to it eventually.
Yeah, for every vampire, there's also a Jim Elkhorn, is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's one thing I'm worried about as we get further into it, because like it's just going to be a sign of the times. But I am actually surprised we haven't had more. Like we did have a little bit of with the zombie, we had a little bit of cultural appropriation, but I just have a feeling there's got to be more coming. There's just got to be more.
There's more cultures that we can be offensive to.
Absolutely. It was the one thing, we haven't stated about this, about the Energy Eater, but when they talk about the people who worked on the high steel, they refer to them, I know this is probably more common parlance in the United States, but they refer to them as the Indian high steel workers. And I initially legitimately was just like, do they mean like East Indians? Like, are we gonna like? I thought that's where it was headed, and then I was like, oh, okay, no, that's not what they mean. Like, it just is a thing where I'm like, I don't know what you're referring to.
Right. Well, this is a case where I think you do have to look at the times. I don't think anyone. Well, certainly it was not common parlance back then to say Native Americans instead of Indians. So I think I have to give them a pass on that. I mean, now we can say point stuff out.
It was just more that I was just like, wait, which one are they referring to? Because I was too much in my head about now. I was like, wait, well, I don't know who we're going to see now. Which culture should I worry about offending?
But it is a point. There are some things we watch, and it's not to forgive certain things, but you do realize that, a show that is now 50 years old almost, yes, there's going to be some things that are acceptable then that are not acceptable now.
That's true.
I will say I was much, much happier with Jim Elkhorn than I was with the entire plot of Bad Medicine.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd agree.
It is certainly, you could see a writer with a lot more nuance and like willingness to like be like, well, let's write a real character, everybody. Made for a better episode for sure. Well, Trish, thank you so much for coming on and talk about Kolchak with us, bringing your expertise in the world of newspapers to this episode.
It's been tremendous fun talking with y'all. I've been enjoying your show for quite a while back. I think I started listening back when you did the Triffids TV show.
Oh, right.
Triffid is my handle on Twitter, and it just caught my attention. And
you grow Triffids in the backyard?
Well, I don't talk about that. But you guys just have such a fun, lighthearted. I just enjoy your format and the repartee and how you treat things with You enjoy the shows mostly. You look at stuff with a modern perspective, but you're not angry all the time about it's just a fun. This podcast is fun to listen to, and I'm really happy to have been a part of it now.
Well,
thank you very much.
I'm flattered. I'm flattered. The listener can't see, but Jordan's blushing so much. He's just like, his face is all red.
Well, I don't know how to take compliments, so I'll just leave the room.
Jordan just hangs up on the Zoom call. And listener, if you've enjoyed listening to Trish, she's got some things going on herself. You're part of the Skiffy and Fanty Show podcast crew, of course. And then you've also got some things going on Twitch. You're quite busy. You want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to and where people can find you?
Sure. The easiest place to find me is on Twitter. I'm at PEMATSON, Patricia E. Matson. I'm a moderator on Arvin Elron's Twitch channel, which Arvin Elron does a lot of RPG games and also does some playthroughs of video games that focus on narrative, storyline choices and stuff like that, more than the grinder games. And I'm on a couple of games, RPGs, playing through the Dragon of Icespire Peak, D&D, in one of them, and we're doing a different one-shot that has turned into so far 2 episodes, and will probably be 3 or 4. But let's see, I've done some recordings for LibriVox, an H. Beam Piper novelette called Omnilingual, and I guess I have a lot of interests. But you can keep up with what I'm doing on Twitter.
It's so impressive. We're just watching Kolchak every week.
It is. When I hear what other people do with their lives, I'm like, oh man, I need to get more productive. Well, Trish, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you. You were a great guest.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
And, of course, listener, you can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you have anything you want to let us know about. And on Twitter and Instagram, we'll have clips from these episodes. Kolchak always delivers great stuff. I'm never at a loss for, cool stuff to put up for this. So you'll definitely see some Moss Man. You'll see some Kraken hallways. You'll get it all. And the handle there is at continuumdrag, of course. But that wraps up this episode. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And, Jordan, I'll see you next week.
Oh, and I forgot what's real. What is this, Salvador Dali's bar mitzvah picture? Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.